My name is Ted Morrison, and I am 57 years old. I have been a single father to my daughter Sarah since she was 12 after my wife Linda passed away from breast cancer. For 13 years, I thought I knew my daughter better than anyone in this world. Sarah and I had always been close. We shared morning coffee, weekend camping trips, and she even helped me in my woodworking shop. She was my little girl, who grew into a brilliant young woman, accepted to the Art Institute of Chicago with a full scholarship. But 6 months ago, everything changed. Sarah became distant, secretive, and rebellious. After a bitter 3-day argument about her suddenly wanting to drop out of college to become a freelance artist. She did something that shocked me to my core. She woke up early, made me coffee, and apologized with the sweetest voice I had heard in months. But something deep in my gut told me this kindness was not genuine. Before I dive into what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories that matter. Because what I discovered about my daughter that day changed everything I thought I knew about the person I had raised and loved unconditionally for over a decade. Let me take you back to the beginning when life made sense and my world felt complete. Linda and I lived in a cozy house in southeast Portland, Oregon, with our beautiful daughter Sarah. Those were the golden years. Linda worked as a nurse at OHSU Hospital, and I had a steady job as an architect for a downtown firm. Sarah was the light of our lives, a curious little girl with paint-stained fingers who could spend hours drawing elaborate pictures of imaginary worlds. Linda was diagnosed with breast cancer when Sarah was 10 years old. We fought that battle together as a family for 2 long years. I watched my strong, vibrant wife slowly fade away while trying to shield Sarah from the worst of it. Linda passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand and whispering that I needed to take care of our baby girl. That day, I became both mother and father to a 12-year-old who had just lost her anchor in the world. I made the difficult decision to leave my architecture career. The long hours and rigid schedule would not work for a single dad raising a grieving daughter. I started Morrison custom woodworking from our garage, taking on furniture projects and home renovations that allowed me to work flexible hours. Money was tight, but Sarah always came first. I taught myself to braid hair, helped with homework every night, and learned to cook more than just scrambled eggs and toast. Sarah and I developed our own traditions. Every morning we would sit at the kitchen table with our coffee. Mine was black, hers was mostly milk with a splash of coffee. We would talk about everything from her art projects to my latest woodworking commission. She would tell me about school drama, her dreams of becoming an artist. And sometimes we would just sit in comfortable silence, both missing Linda, but grateful to have each other. As Sarah grew older, she became my workshop assistant. I taught her how to use a miter saw, safely how to sand with the grain, and how to finish wood so it glowed like honey. She had steady hands and an eye for detail that reminded me of her mother. On weekends, we would load up my pickup truck and go camping in the Cascade Mountains. Sarah would sketch the landscape while I fished for trout in crystal clear streams. Those were the moments when I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was doing this single-parent thing right. Sarah excelled in high school. Her art teachers raved about her natural talent and encouraged her to apply to prestigious art schools. When the acceptance letter from the Art Institute of Chicago arrived with a full scholarship offer, Sarah and I danced around the kitchen like we had won the lottery. I was so proud of the young woman she had become, independent, creative, intelligent, and kind. Everything Linda and I had hoped for, and more. But somewhere around her senior year, things started to shift. Sarah became more private, spending hours on her phone and computer. She started going out more often, usually to art shows or galleries downtown. At first, I was happy she was exploring her passion and meeting other artists. I trusted her judgment and wanted to give her space to grow into the adult she was becoming. Looking back now, I realize I should have paid closer attention to the subtle changes in her behavior and the new influences entering her life. The first real crack in our relationship appeared about 6 months before graduation. Sarah started coming home later and later from her art outings. When I would ask where she had been, she would give vague answers like, "Just looking at some paintings," or "talking to other artists about techniques." Her phone was constantly buzzing with messages, but she would quickly flip it over when I walked by. The easy conversations over morning coffee became strained and brief. One evening in late February, I decided to address my growing concerns directly. Sarah was in her room supposedly working on her senior art portfolio. I knocked on her door and asked if we could talk. She reluctantly let me in, and I noticed several sketches scattered across her desk that looked different from her usual style. They were darker, more abstract, with a sensuality that seemed beyond her years. I asked her about the new direction in her art, and she became defensive immediately. She accused me of not understanding her growth as an artist and said I was being too protective. When I mentioned my concerns about her late nights and secretive behavior, Sarah exploded. She yelled that I was treating her like a child and that she was almost 18 and could make her own decisions. The argument escalated quickly, with Sarah storming out of the house and not returning until well after midnight. Things between us remained tense for weeks. Our morning coffee routine became awkward and silent. Sarah would grab a quick cup and disappear to her room or leave for school without our usual chat. I tried to give her space while fighting the urge to demand answers about where she was spending so much time. The house felt cold and empty in a way it had not since the months after Linda's death. The breaking point came in early March when Sarah announced she had decided not to attend the Art Institute. She wanted to stay in Portland and pursue her art independently. I was stunned. We had spent months preparing for her move to Chicago, and I had been saving money for her living expenses, despite the full scholarship. When I asked her to explain this sudden change of heart, Sarah became hostile and defensive. She accused me of never believing in her talent and said that traditional art education would stifle her creativity. She claimed she had met real artists who told her that art school was a waste of time for someone with her natural ability. When I pressed her for details about these mysterious mentors, Sarah shut down completely. She said I would not understand and that I was too narrow-minded to appreciate what she was trying to accomplish. Our argument continued for 3 brutal days. I tried everything from reasoning to pleading to setting firm boundaries. Sarah responded with increasing hostility, accusing me of being controlling and jealous of her success. She said I wanted to keep her trapped in Portland because I was afraid of being alone. Her words cut deep because there was a grain of truth in them. I was afraid of her leaving, but not for selfish reasons. I was terrified that my little girl was making a mistake that would derail her bright future. On the 3rd night of our conflict, Sarah screamed that she hated me and wished I was the one who had died instead of her mother. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood in our kitchen staring at this young woman who looked like my daughter, but seemed like a complete stranger. After she stormed off to her room, I sat at our kitchen table until dawn, wondering where I had gone wrong and how our beautiful relationship had deteriorated so completely. Thursday morning arrived with an eerie calm. I had barely slept, my mind racing through possible solutions to our crisis. I was considering calling Sarah's school counselor, or perhaps Linda's sister in Seattle, for advice, as I sat in the kitchen nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and staring at the sunrise through our window. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, and my breath caught. She looked like the daughter I remembered from before everything went wrong. Her hair was neatly brushed. She was wearing one of her favorite vintage dresses, and most shocking of all, she was smiling. Not the forced, angry expression I had grown accustomed to, but the genuine, warm smile that used to light up our morning conversations. "Good morning, Dad," she said softly, her voice carrying none of the venom from our recent fights. "I am sorry I'm up so late. I was thinking about everything we discussed, and I realized I owe you an apology." I watched in amazement as Sarah moved around our kitchen with familiar ease, pulling out the good coffee beans I saved for special occasions and starting a fresh pot. She hummed quietly while she worked a habit she had inherited from Linda. The sight was so reminiscent of peaceful mornings from years past that I felt tears prick my eyes. "You do not need to apologize, sweetheart," I managed to say, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. "We both said things we did not mean." Sarah shook her head as she pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. "No, Dad, you were right to be concerned. I have been acting crazy, and I know you are just worried about my future. You have sacrificed so much for me over the years, and here I am, throwing away opportunities you could only dream of when you were my age." She began preparing what looked like a full breakfast, cracking eggs into a bowl and slicing bread for toast. I had not seen her cook anything more complicated than microwave popcorn in months. As she worked, Sarah continued talking in that sweet, apologetic tone that should have made me happy, but instead sent chills down my spine. "I think we should sit down and really talk about my plans," she said, not quite meeting my eyes as she spoke. "Maybe we can find a compromise that makes both of us happy. I know you want what is best for me, and I want you to be proud of the choices I make." The coffee finished brewing, and Sarah poured 2 cups, adding just the right amount of milk to mine. She set the mug in front of me with a gentle smile, then returned to the stove to flip the eggs. Everything about her behavior was perfect, considerate, and loving. It was exactly what I had been hoping for during our terrible week of fighting. But something felt fundamentally wrong. As I watched Sarah move around the kitchen, I noticed small details that bothered me. She kept glancing at the clock on the microwave as if she was timing something. There was a nervous energy beneath her calm demeanor, like an actress playing a role she had not quite mastered. Most disturbing of all, when she thought I was not looking, her expression would slip for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath the sweetness. I also noticed she was wearing a delicate gold necklace I had never seen before. When I asked her about it, Sarah touched it reflexively and said it was a gift from a friend at one of the art shows. The way she said "friend" sent another wave of unease through me. Her phone, which usually never stopped buzzing, had been silent all morning, though I could see it face down on the counter near her elbow. The breakfast Sarah prepared was delicious, but I found it difficult to enjoy. Every bite felt like I was swallowing my growing suspicions, along with the perfectly seasoned eggs. Sarah chatted brightly about her art projects and asked about my latest woodworking commission, but the conversation felt scripted and hollow. She was saying all the right words, but they lacked the genuine warmth that had always characterized our relationship. After we finished eating, Sarah suggested we spend the day together, maybe visit some art galleries downtown, so she could show me the kind of work that was inspiring her recent pieces. The suggestion sounded wonderful on the surface, but something about the way she presented it felt rehearsed. I agreed partly because I wanted to believe this change in her attitude was genuine, and partly because I was curious to see what she would reveal during our outing. As Sarah went upstairs to get ready, I noticed she left a piece of paper sticking out of her jacket pocket. When I was certain she was out of earshot, I carefully pulled it free. It was a handwritten note in unfamiliar handwriting that made my blood run cold. The note said, "Remember what we talked about. Be sweet to your dad today, and get him to agree to the plan. Everything depends on you handling this right. I will be waiting for your call this evening." I quickly put the note back where I found it, my hand shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. The confirmation that Sarah's sudden kindness was a calculated manipulation hit me like a punch to the stomach. Whatever was going on with my daughter involved another person, someone who was coaching her on how to handle me. The realization that our morning reconciliation was nothing more than an act made me feel sick. When Sarah came back downstairs, I studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of the daughter I thought I knew. She was still smiling and chatting enthusiastically about our planned gallery visit. But now I could see the performance for what it was. Every gesture felt forced, every word carefully chosen to achieve maximum effect. I made an excuse about needing to finish a woodworking project and suggested we postpone our outing until later in the week. Sarah's face fell for just a moment before she quickly recovered her composure. She agreed cheerfully, but I caught a flash of frustration in her eyes that confirmed my worst suspicions. After Sarah left the house claiming she was going to visit her friend Jessica to work on their joint senior project, I sat in my workshop, trying to process what I had discovered. The note proved that someone was pulling the strings behind Sarah's behavior, coaching her on how to manipulate me. The question was, who and what did they want from my daughter? I thought about calling Sarah's school to verify her story about working with Jessica, but I realized I needed more information before confronting her again. My gut was telling me that whatever was happening was far more serious than teenage rebellion. Someone was influencing my daughter, and I was beginning to suspect their intentions were not innocent. That evening, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had as a parent, who valued trust and privacy. I was going to follow Sarah and find out who was behind her sudden personality change. The note had mentioned a phone call that evening, and I intended to discover who would be on the other end of that conversation. The next morning, I told Sarah I had errands to run in town and would be out most of the day. She seemed relieved by this news, which only strengthened my resolve to uncover what she was hiding. I watched from down the street as she left our house around 11:30, walking with a spring in her step that suggested she was excited about wherever she was going. I followed at a distance in my pickup truck, feeling both guilty and determined. Sarah walked downtown to Pioneer Courthouse Square, where she stood waiting near the fountain. After about 10 minutes, a man approached her, and my heart nearly stopped. He appeared to be in his early 30s, well-dressed in an expensive-looking jacket and designer jeans. He was definitely not one of Sarah's teenage friends. I parked across the street and watched as this stranger embraced my daughter in a way that was far too intimate for a casual friendship. They kissed passionately, and Sarah melted into his arms like she had been waiting for this moment all day. The sight of my 17-year-old daughter in the arms of a grown man made my vision blur with rage and panic. They walked hand in hand to a trendy coffee shop on Burnside Street. I waited a few minutes before entering, positioning myself at a table where I could observe them without being seen. The man was handsome in a calculated way, with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of smooth confidence that came from years of practice. He spoke in low, intimate tones, and Sarah hung on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. I strained to hear their conversation over the ambient noise of the coffee shop. I caught fragments about Sarah's incredible talent and how traditional education would only hold back someone with her natural gifts. The man kept touching Sarah's hand and stroking her cheek gestures that made my skin crawl. She looked at him with the kind of adoration that teenagers usually reserved for movie stars, completely captivated by his attention and praise. After about an hour, they left the coffee shop together. I followed them to an upscale art gallery in the Pearl District, where the man seemed to be well known. The gallery owner greeted him by name, calling him Marcus, and several patrons nodded respectfully as he passed. He guided Sarah through the exhibits, pointing out various pieces and explaining their significance with the air of an expert. I realized this Marcus character was using the art world as his hunting ground, targeting young artists with dreams and ambitions that he could manipulate. Sarah was clearly not his first victim based on how smoothly he operated and how comfortable he seemed in this environment. The thought that my daughter was being groomed by a predator made me physically ill. When they left the gallery, I continued following at a safe distance. They went to an expensive restaurant for lunch, where Marcus ordered wine, despite Sarah obviously being underage. The waitress did not question it, suggesting this was not the first time Marcus had brought a young girl to this establishment. I sat in my truck across the street, watching them through the restaurant window and fighting the urge to storm inside and drag Sarah away. But I knew that would only push her further into this man's arms. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I could formulate a plan to save my daughter. That evening, I sat in my darkened living room, waiting for Sarah to return home. I had spent the afternoon researching Marcus Chen, which turned out to be the full name of the man who had been manipulating my daughter. What I discovered made my worst fears seem optimistic by comparison. Marcus Chen was 32 years old and owned a small gallery in the Pearl District called Urban Canvas. On the surface, he appeared to be a successful businessman and art dealer. But digging deeper into social media and online reviews revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior with young female artists. I found 3 different women who had posted warnings about Marcus on various art forums and social media groups. They described a pattern of predatory behavior, where Marcus would identify talented young artists, usually teenagers, or women in their early 20s, and promise them career opportunities in exchange for personal relationships. According to these accounts, Marcus would start by praising the young artist's work and offering to feature them in his gallery. He would gradually escalate the personal attention, making the victim feel special and chosen. Once he had gained their trust and devotion, he would convince them to move in with him, cut ties with family and friends, and become completely dependent on his support and guidance. The relationships would typically last 6 months to a year, during which Marcus would take a percentage of any art sales, while providing minimal actual career advancement. When he grew tired of his current victim, or found someone new, he would suddenly withdraw his support, often leaving the young woman stranded and heartbroken, with no means of supporting herself. One particularly detailed account came from a young woman named Julia Rodriguez, who had been involved with Marcus 2 years earlier, when she was 19. She described how he had convinced her to drop out of art school and move to Portland to live with him. According to Julia, Marcus had promised her a solo exhibition and connections with major collectors. Instead, she ended up working as an unpaid assistant in his gallery while he pursued other women. Julia's story ended with her being evicted from Marcus's apartment with no notice when he decided to move on to his next victim. She had been forced to return home to her parents in California, her dreams crushed and her education derailed. The warning she posted was passionate and detailed, clearly written by someone who wanted to prevent other young women from making the same mistake. The most chilling part of my research was discovering that Marcus specifically targeted women who had lost a parent or came from difficult family situations. He seemed to have a predator's instinct for finding vulnerability and exploiting it. Sarah fit his victim profile perfectly, a talented young artist who had lost her mother and might be susceptible to manipulation by an older man offering guidance and affection. As I read through the accounts of Marcus's previous victims, I began to understand the full scope of what Sarah was facing. This was not a case of teenage rebellion or even a misguided romance. My daughter was being systematically groomed by a skilled manipulator who had perfected his techniques on multiple previous victims. When Sarah finally came home around 10:30 that evening, she was glowing with happiness in a way that broke my heart. She hummed softly as she moved through the house, clearly replaying the day's events in her mind. I pretended to be reading in the living room as she passed by, and she gave me a cheerful goodnight that felt like another knife to my chest. I lay awake all night staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to save my daughter from a predator who had already sunk his claws deep into her psyche. I knew that a direct confrontation would likely backfire, driving Sarah further into Marcus's arms. But I also knew that every day I waited was another day for Marcus to tighten his psychological hold on her. The next morning, I made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I was going to confront Marcus Chen directly, but not before I had gathered enough evidence and allies to ensure that Sarah could not dismiss what I had to say as jealousy or overprotection. I started by reaching out to Julia Rodriguez through the social media platform where she had posted her warning about Marcus. I sent her a private message explaining that my daughter was currently being targeted by the same man who had hurt her. Julia responded within hours, expressing genuine concern and offering to help in any way she could. During our phone conversation, Julia provided even more disturbing details about Marcus's methods. She explained how he would gradually isolate his victims from their support systems, convincing them that family and friends did not understand their artistic vision. He would create a sense of us against the world, making the young woman feel that he was the only person who truly believed in her talent. Julia also revealed that Marcus had a pattern of convincing his victims to pose for increasingly intimate photographs, which he would claim were for artistic purposes or promotional materials. These images would later be used as leverage to keep the women from speaking out about his behavior or to humiliate them if they tried to leave the relationship. Most importantly, Julia agreed to come to Portland and confront Marcus in person if necessary. She said she had been waiting for an opportunity to expose him and prevent him from hurting another young woman. Her courage and determination gave me hope that maybe together we could break through the psychological hold Marcus had on Sarah. I spent the rest of the day planning my approach. I knew I needed to catch Marcus off guard, preferably in a situation where Sarah could see his true character without the careful mask he wore during their private moments together. The gallery seemed like the perfect setting, a place where Marcus felt confident and in control, but where I could present evidence of his past behavior. I also prepared a folder of printed materials, screenshots of the warnings from Marcus's previous victims, copies of social media posts showing him with other young women, and a timeline of his pattern of predatory behavior. I wanted to have undeniable proof that this was not an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. That evening, I told Sarah I would be working late in my shop and might not see her before she went to bed. She seemed pleased by this news, probably because it meant she could talk to Marcus on the phone without worrying about me overhearing. Around 9 o'clock, I heard her voice through her bedroom door, speaking in the soft, intimate tones of someone deeply infatuated. I positioned myself outside her room and listened to fragments of the conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Sarah was telling Marcus about our recent argument and asking for his advice on how to handle me. I heard her say things like, "He just does not understand real art," and "I cannot wait until we can be together all the time." The part that nearly broke my resolve was hearing Sarah tell Marcus that she loved him and missed him terribly, even though they had just been together that afternoon. The vulnerability in her voice reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares, trusting me completely to keep her safe from the monsters in her closet. Now, the monster was real, and he had convinced my daughter that I was the threat. But I was not going to let him destroy her life without a fight. Tomorrow, I would take the battle directly to Marcus Chen and force him to show his true face in front of the person whose future hung in the balance. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood, as I prepared for what I knew would be one of the most important confrontations of my life. I dressed carefully in my best jeans and a button-down shirt, wanting to look respectable and authoritative when I faced Marcus Chen. The folder of evidence sat on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon ready to expose the truth about the man who had been manipulating my daughter. I waited until Sarah left for school before making my move. I knew she had plans to meet Marcus at his gallery, after classes supposedly, to discuss her upcoming solo exhibition. The irony that she was skipping her final weeks of high school to spend time with a man who was destroying her future was not lost on me. Urban Canvas Gallery was located in a converted warehouse space in the Pearl District, surrounded by expensive condos and trendy restaurants. The neighborhood reeked of artificial sophistication, the kind of place where people paid ridiculous amounts of money to feel cultured and important. It was the perfect hunting ground for someone like Marcus. I parked across the street and watched the gallery for nearly an hour before making my move. Through the large windows, I could see Marcus moving around inside, arranging artwork and speaking with what appeared to be a potential customer. He moved with the confident grace of someone who felt completely in control of his environment and circumstances. When I finally entered the gallery, Marcus looked up with the practiced smile of a professional salesman. His expression shifted slightly when he realized I was not a typical customer, but he maintained his polished demeanor as he approached me. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, extending his hand for a shake that felt like gripping a snake. "Welcome to Urban Canvas. Are you interested in any particular style or artist?" "Actually, I am interested in discussing my daughter, Sarah Morrison," I replied, watching his face carefully for any reaction. "I believe you two have become quite close recently." Marcus's smile never wavered, but I caught a flicker of calculation in his eyes as he processed my words. He was clearly trying to determine how much I knew and what approach would be most effective in handling me. "Sarah is an incredibly talented young artist," Marcus said smoothly. "I have been honored to provide some guidance as she develops her unique artistic voice. You must be very proud of her work." "I am proud of my daughter," I replied carefully, "but I am concerned about the influences she has been exposed to lately. She has changed quite dramatically in recent months, and I think you might have some insight into why that has happened." Marcus gestured toward a seating area near the back of the gallery, his movements casual, but his eyes alert. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss this like civilized adults. I can see you are worried about Sarah, but I think you may have some misconceptions about our relationship." As we sat down, I pulled out my folder of evidence and placed it on the coffee table between us. Marcus glanced at it, but maintained his composed expression, though I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "Before we continue," I said, "I think you should know that I have done some research into your background and your relationships with other young artists. I am particularly interested in your pattern of behavior with women like Julia Rodriguez, Angela Matthews, and Diana Foster." For the first time since I had entered the gallery, Marcus's mask slipped. His eyes hardened, and his smile became forced, revealing glimpses of the predator lurking beneath his polished exterior. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," Marcus said. His voice still controlled, but with an edge of menace. "Whatever you think you know about my personal relationships is based on speculation and probably some bitter complaints from women who could not handle the demands of a serious artistic career." "Is that what you call it?" I asked, opening the folder and pulling out printed screenshots of the warnings posted by his previous victims. "A serious artistic career, because according to multiple sources, Your idea of career development involves isolating young women from their families and exploiting them financially and emotionally." Marcus stood up abruptly, his careful composure finally cracking. "You have no idea what you are talking about. Sarah came to me because she felt stifled and misunderstood. I have given her opportunities and guidance that she would never receive from someone like you." "Someone like me," I replied, also standing. "You mean someone who actually cares about her welfare instead of using her for personal gratification?" Before Marcus could respond, the gallery door opened and Sarah walked in, stopping short when she saw us facing off like two gunfighters at high noon. Her face went through a range of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then anger as she realized what was happening. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Sarah demanded, moving quickly to stand beside Marcus. "How dare you show up at Marcus's gallery and harass him? I am trying to protect you from a predator," I said, my voice breaking slightly with the weight of everything I was feeling. "Sarah, this man has done this exact same thing to at least 3 other young women. He is not interested in your art or your future. He is manipulating you." Sarah's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You do not know anything about Marcus or our relationship. You are just jealous because I found someone who actually believes in my talent." And at that moment, the gallery door opened again, and Julia Rodriguez walked in. I had arranged to meet her here, but seeing her in person still took my breath away. She was a beautiful young woman, probably about 21 now, with the same artistic sensibility and wounded vulnerability that I recognized in Sarah. "Hello, Marcus," Julia said quietly, her voice steady, despite the obvious emotional cost of facing her former abuser. "I see you have found another talented young artist to mentor." The color drained from Marcus's face as he recognized Julia. His confident demeanor crumbled completely, replaced by the cornered desperation of a predator whose hunting ground had been invaded by his former prey. "Julia, what are you doing here?" Marcus stammered, his smooth voice finally showing cracks. "I thought you had moved back to California." "I did," Julia replied, looking directly at Sarah with compassion and understanding. "But when Sarah's father contacted me and told me what was happening, I knew I had to come back and try to prevent you from destroying another young woman's life." Sarah looked back and forth between Julia and Marcus, confusion and doubt beginning to replace her initial anger. "I do not understand. Marcus, who is this woman?" Julia turned to Sarah with the kind of gentle authority that came from hard-earned experience. "My name is Julia Rodriguez, and 2 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. I was 19, talented, and completely convinced that Marcus was going to make all my dreams come true. Instead, he nearly destroyed my life." The tension in the gallery was electric as Julia began to tell her story. Sarah listened with growing horror as Julia described the same promises, the same manipulation tactics, and the same devastating abandonment that Marcus had used before. "He told me I was special," Julia continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "He said traditional art education would stifle my creativity, and that he could offer me opportunities that no school could provide. He convinced me to drop out of UC Davis and move in with him. For 8 months, I believed I was living my dream." Marcus tried to interrupt, claiming Julia was a disturbed ex-girlfriend who could not accept that their relationship had ended naturally. But Julia pressed on, describing details about Marcus's apartment, his car, and his personal habits that proved she had indeed lived with him intimately. "He had me working in the gallery 12 hours a day for no pay," Julia explained to Sarah. "He said it was part of my education, that I was learning the business from the inside. Meanwhile, he was taking 50% of any sales from my artwork and using that money to wine and dine his next victim." Sarah's face grew pale as Julia continued. When I started asking questions about the solo exhibition, he had promised me Marcus became angry and controlling. He accused me of being ungrateful and said that maybe I was not as talented as he had initially thought. Then I discovered he was already pursuing another young artist, telling her the exact same lies he had told me. "That is not true," Sarah said weakly, but I could see doubt creeping into her eyes. "Marcus loves me. He said he had never met anyone with my artistic vision." Julia pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a series of text messages. "These are screenshots of messages Marcus sent me 2 years ago. I want you to read them and tell me if they sound familiar." As Sarah read the messages, her face went through a transformation that broke my heart. The texts contained the same romantic language, the same artistic praise, and the same promises about exhibitions and career advancement that Marcus had obviously been using on her. "He told me I was the most talented artist he had ever worked with," Julia continued gently. "He said I was mature beyond my years, and that age was just a number when two souls connected on an artistic level. He made me feel like the most special person in the world, right up until the day he threw me out of his apartment with no warning and no explanation." Marcus finally snapped under the pressure of Julia's testimony. His carefully constructed facade crumbled completely, revealing the angry, manipulative predator beneath. "You were nothing special," he snarled at Julia, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just another naive little girl who thought she could make it in the art world without paying her dues. And you," he said, turning to Sarah with a cruel smile, "you are even more pathetic. At least Julia had some actual talent. You are just a mediocre suburban princess who thinks daddy's money can buy her a career." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. I watched my daughter's face crumple as the man she had trusted and loved revealed his true opinion of her. All the sweet words, the passionate promises, and the declarations of love were exposed as lies in that one moment of unguarded cruelty. "Sarah is incredibly talented," I said firmly, moving to stand beside my daughter. "But even if she were not, she deserves to be treated with respect and honesty, not manipulated by a predator who sees young women as nothing more than temporary entertainment." Marcus laughed bitterly, completely abandoning any pretense of respectability. "You people are all the same. No vision, no understanding of what it takes to create real art. Sarah could have learned something valuable from me, but instead, she will end up just like every other suburban housewife with a hobby." The cruelty in his voice was the final straw for Sarah. I watched years of manipulation and psychological abuse crumble in the face of Marcus's unveiled contempt. My daughter looked at this man she had been willing to sacrifice everything for and finally saw him as he truly was. "I want to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Dad, can we please just go home?" The ride home was silent, except for Sarah's quiet crying. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew she needed time to process what had just happened. The revelation of Marcus's true nature had shattered her worldview, and I could see her struggling to reconcile the man she thought she loved with the cruel predator he had revealed himself to be. When we arrived home, Sarah went straight to her room and closed the door. I could hear her sobbing through the walls, and it took every ounce of self-control I had not to barge in and try to fix everything immediately. Instead, I made a pot of coffee and waited, knowing that when she was ready to talk, I would be there for her. An hour later, Sarah emerged from her room with red, swollen eyes and the defeated posture of someone whose dreams had been crushed. She sat down at our kitchen table in the same chair where we had shared so many morning conversations over the years. "I am sorry, Dad," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "I am so sorry for everything. For the way I treated you, for believing his lies, for almost throwing away my future, for someone who never cared about me at all." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine, feeling how small and fragile they seemed. "You do not need to apologize to me, sweetheart. You were manipulated by someone who had a lot of practice at fooling people. What matters now is that you recognize the truth when you saw it." Sarah began crying again, but this time there was relief mixed with the pain. "How could I have been so stupid? All those things he said about you being controlling and not understanding my art. He was just trying to turn me against you so I would be completely dependent on him." "You were not stupid," I said firmly. "You were a talented, passionate young woman who believed in love and trusted someone who seemed to believe in your dreams. Marcus Chen is a professional manipulator who has hurt multiple women. The fault is entirely his, not yours." Over the next few hours, Sarah and I had the most honest conversation we had shared in months. She told me about how Marcus had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her that they were jealous of her talent and success. She described how he had slowly eroded her confidence in my judgment, painting me as an obstacle to her artistic development. Sarah also revealed some disturbing details about Marcus's behavior that made me grateful we had intervened when we did. He had been pressuring her to move in with him after graduation, and had already started suggesting that she pose for increasingly intimate photographs for her portfolio. "The worst part," Sarah said through fresh tears, "is that I was ready to give up everything for him. College, my relationship with you, my friends, my entire future. I thought I was being mature and independent, but I was just being manipulated." I assured Sarah that her feelings had been real, even if Marcus's were not. The love and trust she had felt were not weaknesses to be ashamed of, but rather evidence of her capacity for deep emotion and commitment. The tragedy was that Marcus had exploited those beautiful qualities for his own selfish purposes. As the evening wore on, Sarah and I began to rebuild the bridge that Marcus had tried to burn between us. We talked about her art, her fears about the future, and her dreams of success in the creative world. I promised to support her artistic development in healthy, appropriate ways, and Sarah promised to be more open with me about the people and influences in her life. We also discussed her college plans. Sarah admitted that she still wanted to attend the Art Institute of Chicago, despite Marcus's attempts to convince her otherwise. She realized that formal education would give her both the technical skills and the professional network she needed to build a sustainable career in art. Most importantly, Sarah began to understand that true support and love did not require her to sacrifice her other relationships or abandon her goals. The people who truly cared about her success would encourage her growth while respecting her autonomy and safety. 6 months later, Sarah and I stood in her dorm room at the Art Institute of Chicago, hanging her artwork on the walls and arranging her art supplies on the desk by the window. The transformation in my daughter over those months had been remarkable to witness. The confident, talented young woman I had always known had returned, but now she carried herself with the hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving manipulation and abuse. Sarah had thrown herself into her senior year with renewed focus, creating a stunning portfolio that earned praise from her teachers and acceptance to several top art programs. She had also worked with a counselor to process her experience with Marcus and develop better tools for recognizing manipulation and unhealthy relationships in the future. The legal situation with Marcus had resolved itself in an unexpected way. After our confrontation at the gallery, Julia had filed a formal complaint with the police, and 2 other former victims had come forward with similar stories. Marcus was ultimately charged with several misdemeanors related to his predatory behavior, and his gallery had closed under the weight of the scandal. Sarah had stayed in touch with Julia, who had become something of a mentor and friend. Julia had returned to school, completing her degree in art therapy, and was now helping other young women who had experienced similar manipulation. Their friendship was a beautiful example of how survivors could support each other and find strength in shared experience. The night before I was scheduled to fly back to Portland, Sarah and I went out for dinner at a small Italian restaurant near her campus. As we shared a bottle of sparkling cider and talked about her classes and new friendships, I marveled at how far we had both come since that terrible morning when she had offered me coffee with a smile that hid such dangerous secrets. "Thank you for saving me, Dad," Sarah said suddenly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know I fought you every step of the way, but thank you for trusting your instincts and not giving up on me." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses she had developed from hours of painting and sculpting. "I will always fight for you, sweetheart. That is what parents do. We protect our children from the monsters even when they cannot see the danger themselves." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, it was completely genuine and free from any hidden agenda. "I promise I will never let anyone come between us like that again. I understand now that the people who truly love me want to see me succeed on my own terms, not become dependent on their approval or support." As we walked back to her dorm through the bustling streets of Chicago, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught both of us. Sarah had learned to trust her own instincts and recognize the warning signs of manipulation. I had learned the importance of balancing protection with respect for my daughter's growing independence. Most importantly, we had both discovered that the bond between a parent and child is stronger than any outside force trying to tear it apart. Marcus had tried to convince Sarah that I was the enemy, but in the end, our love and trust had proven unbreakable. The next morning, as I prepared to leave Sarah at college and return to my empty house in Portland, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was sadness at the physical distance that would now separate us, but also immense pride in the strong, wise woman Sarah had become. The little girl who used to help me in my woodshop had grown into someone capable of recognizing deception and making her own informed choices. Sarah hugged me goodbye at the airport, and I could feel the confidence radiating from her small frame. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she said, "and do not worry about me. I know who I am now, and I know who I can trust." And as my plane lifted off from Chicago, carrying me back to Oregon, I thought about the power of parental intuition and the courage it takes to act on those instincts even when your child is fighting against you. Sometimes love means being the villain in your child's story until they are old enough to understand that you were actually the hero all along. The experience with Marcus had been terrifying and heartbreaking, but it had also strengthened the relationship between Sarah and me in ways I never could have imagined. We had faced down a real monster together, and we had won. That knowledge would carry both of us through whatever challenges the future might bring. Now, looking back on those dark months, I am grateful for the warning signals my gut provided, and proud that I chose to trust them, despite the pain it caused. Sometimes, being a parent means making the hard choice to investigate when something feels wrong, even if it means discovering uncomfortable truths about the people your child trusts. My advice to any parent facing a similar situation is simple trust. Your instincts gather evidence before acting, and never stop fighting for your child's safety and future. The temporary damage to your relationship is nothing compared to the permanent harm that can result from allowing a predator to continue their manipulation unchecked. And remember that love sometimes requires us to be the bearer of painful truths, the destroyer of dangerous illusions, and the guardian against threats our children cannot yet recognize. It is not always a comfortable role, but it is one of the most important jobs we will ever have as parents. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the courage to see the world as it really is, not as they wish it could be. And sometimes trusting our instincts is the only thing standing between our children and a future of regret and burn. Sarah is thriving now in her junior year at art school, creating beautiful work that reflects both her talent and her hard-earned wisdom about the world. Our relationship is stronger than it has ever been, built on a foundation of mutual respect and the shared knowledge that we can survive anything as long as we face it together. What started as a betrayal of trust became the foundation for a deeper, more honest relationship between us. And what began as the worst period of my life as a father became the experience I am most proud of, because it was the time when I refused to give up on my daughter, even when she had given up on me. Have you ever had to trust your parental instincts against your child's wishes? How did you handle a situation where you knew your child was being influenced by someone dangerous? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories that matter, and share this with any parent who might be facing similar challenges. Your support means everything to me as I continue to share these important stories. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to let their child make a mistake that could destroy their future. Take care of yourselves and the people you love most.